We moved into the Oakview apartments in late October, just before the leaves turned and the sky settled into that permanent November grey. It was a fresh start, that's what my wife Rachel kept saying as we unpacked boxes in our new home on the third floor. The Oakview was a converted schoolhouse, built in 1912, renovated into 12 apartments with high ceilings and original hardwood floors. It had character, the realtor said. It had history. What the realtor didn't mention was that the original building had 13 rooms. 13 classrooms to be exact, and that the 13th room, the one at the end of the third floor hallway behind a door marked with a faded number 13, had never been renovated. It had been sealed in 1947, and according to the building's maintenance records, no one had entered it since. We noticed the door on our third day. It was at the far end of the hallway, past the laundry room, tucked into an alcove that felt like an afterthought, as if the corridor had been extended just to accommodate it. The door was solid oak, painted over so many times that the grain had been buried under layers of institutional green. A small brass plate near the top read 13 in numbers that had been partially scratched away. The door had no handle on our side. No keyhole, no hinges visible. It was simply a slab set into the wall, sealed flush with the frame, like a scar that had healed over. Our daughter Lily, who was 6 and noticed everything, asked about it on the way to school. "What's behind that door, Daddy?" I told her it was probably an old storage closet. But I couldn't help running my fingers along the seam as I said it. The wood was cold, colder than the wall around it. I asked the building superintendent, a wiry old man named Delgado, who had worked at the Oakview since the 1980s, about the door. He was repairing a garbage disposal in the basement when I found him, and the moment I mentioned room 13, his wrench slipped and cracked the pipe fitting. Water sprayed across the concrete floor as he looked at me with something between annoyance and fear. "That room doesn't exist," he said flatly, reaching for a valve to shut off the water. "It was sealed before I started here. The old super told me it was a classroom where a teacher died in the 40s. They walled it off and forgot about it." I asked why it had a number plate if it didn't exist. Delgado didn't answer. He just handed me a mop and told me to clean up the water while he went to get a new fitting. I mopped the floor in silence, thinking about how he had flinched, how his hands had trembled when he reached for the valve. That night I couldn't sleep. Rachel was breathing softly beside me, and the apartment had settled into that peculiar stillness that old buildings achieve at 2 in the morning, the radiators silent, the floorboards at rest, the whole structure holding its breath. I got up for a glass of water and found Lily standing in the hallway. She was facing the front door, her small silhouette barely visible in the dim light from the bathroom nightlight. I asked her what she was doing, and she turned to look at me with eyes that didn't seem like a 6-year-old's eyes. "The door is open now," she said. My blood went cold. I walked past her and checked the front door, locked. But when I looked at Lily, she was pointing not at the front door, but down the hallway, toward the laundry room, toward the alcove, toward the door that didn't exist. I carried Lily back to bed and told her it was just a bad dream, but I couldn't shake the image of her standing there in the dark, pointing at nothing. The next morning, I walked down to the end of the hallway before work, as the door was still there, still sealed, still cold. But something was different. I couldn't place it at first. Like I stood there for a full minute, staring at the faded green paint, trying to understand what had changed. Then I realized the brass number plate was gone. Where it had been, there was only bare wood, slightly lighter than the painted surface around it, as if the plate had been removed very recently. I ran my finger over the spot. The wood was slightly rough, like it had been pried off with a tool. I looked up and down the hallway. No one was there, but the shavings on the floor were fresh. I went to the city records office during my lunch break. I told the clerk I was researching my building's history for a community newsletter, and she pointed me to the archives in the basement. After an hour of digging through property deeds and renovation permits, I found what I was looking for. The original 1912 blueprints for the Oakview School. 13 classrooms, 1 per grade, 1st through 8th plus 5 overflow rooms. Room 13 was on the 3rd floor and the same spot as our apartment door leading to the sealed room. According to the blueprints, room 13 was originally a music classroom. But in 1947, a handwritten note in the margins read, "Classroom 13 permanently closed per Board of Health directive, door to be sealed." There was no explanation of what the health issue was, no inspector's report, nothing, just that single line written in red ink. I asked Delgado again the next evening, this time more directly. I told him I had been to the city archives and found the blueprints. I told him I knew room 13 had been a music classroom. I told him I knew about the Board of Health directive. Delgado was silent for a long time. He was sitting on a milk crate in the boiler room, drinking coffee from a thermos, his face half lit by a bare bulb. Finally he spoke. It wasn't the Board of Health, he said. That was just what they put on paper. The real reason they sealed room 13 was because of what came out of it at night: music. Not from a phonograph or a radio, but real music, like someone playing a piano that hadn't existed in 30 years. The tenants on the second floor could hear it through the ceiling. The neighbors in the building next door filed complaints. He took a long sip of coffee. The teacher who died in there, Miss Cora Hendricks, she was the music teacher, she hanged herself from the light fixture in 1947, but the music never stopped. That night, I heard it. A faint melody drifting through the walls around 1 a.m. It was piano music. Simple, melancholic, the kind of tune a child might learn in their first year of lessons. But the sound was distant, muffled, as if it were coming through layers of concrete and plaster. I got out of bed and stood in the hallway, pressing my ear to the wall that bordered the alcove. The music grew clearer. It was coming from room 13. I could hear the notes distinctly now, a minor key piece, slow and deliberate, with pauses between phrases, as if the player was reading from sheet music and taking their time. I stood there for nearly an hour, listening. When the music finally stopped, I heard something else. The soft creak of a piano bench being pushed back, and then footsteps, walking away from the piano, toward the door. I started doing research on Cora Hendricks. The public library had a small local history section, and I found a 1947 newspaper article about her death. The Oakview Gazette ran the story on page 3. Local teacher found dead in schoolhouse, coroner rules suicide. The article was brief, a few paragraphs that mentioned her age, her years of service, and the fact that she had been found by the janitor on a Monday morning. But there was a detail the article glossed over, one that I only caught because I read between the lines. The janitor had told police that the piano in room 13 was playing when he unlocked the door. Not a recording, not a radio. The piano itself, a 1920s upright that had been in the room since the school opened, was playing Sweet Hour of Prayer when he walked in. The keys were moving on their own. Miss Hendricks had been dead since Saturday night. I should have stopped there, any reasonable person would have, but the music had become a thread I couldn't let go of. I found the janitor's grandson through a Facebook group for Oakview alumni, a man named Tommy Rinaldi who lived in Florida and had inherited his grandfather's belongings. I called him. He told me his grandfather never talked about what he saw in room 13, but he kept something in a shoebox under his bed for 40 years. A diary, Cora Hendricks's diary. Tommy's grandfather had found it on the piano bench the morning he discovered her body, and instead of turning it over to the police, he had kept it. Tommy mailed me a photocopy of the first few pages. They arrived 3 days later, and what I read changed everything. The diary was not the journal of a suicidal woman. It was the journal of a woman who had discovered something she couldn't explain. Cora Hendricks had been teaching music at Oakview since 1938. In early 1946, she started staying late after school to practice Chopin's Ballade No. 1, a piece she had been working on for years. She wrote that she would often fall asleep at the piano and wake up in the middle of the night to find the room dark and cold. But in March of 1946, something changed. She woke up one night to find the piano playing itself. Not just a few notes, the entire ballade from beginning to end played perfectly. She was not touching the keys. It played with more feeling than I ever could, she wrote. I sat in the corner and listened until the last chord faded, and then a voice, a soft young voice, and said, "That's how it should sound." There was no one there. The diary entries became stranger. Cora had started communicating with the presence in room 13. It claimed to be a former student, a girl named Eleanor, who had died of scarlet fever in 1925 when she was 12 years old. Eleanor had loved music, had begged her parents for piano lessons, but they couldn't afford them. After her death, her spirit had remained in the music room, listening to generations of students play. She could mimic what she heard, but she had never learned to play properly. Not until Cora came. Cora became obsessed. She started staying at the school every night, teaching Eleanor through the piano. She learned so fast, she wrote in November 1946. She played a Bach invention tonight from memory, after hearing me play it once. Her fingers are clumsy at first, but by the second repetition, she is perfect. She wants to learn everything. The entries from early 1947 grew darker. Cora wrote that Eleanor was no longer content to learn through her. Eleanor wanted to play the piano herself, not as a mimic, but as a musician with her own hands. And she couldn't do that without a body. She asked me tonight if she could borrow mine, Cora wrote in February. Just for an hour, she said. I told her no. She didn't speak to me for 3 days afterward. The piano was silent. I felt guilty. I felt like I had betrayed a child who only wanted to make music. By April, Cora was sleeping in room 13 every night. She had stopped teaching her daytime classes. The principal had warned her twice. I know what she wants, Cora wrote on May 2nd, 1947. She wants me to leave, to let her take my place. She wants to walk out of room 13 and see the sun. She has been inside these walls for 22 years. I don't know if I have the strength to refuse her again. That was the last entry. The diary ended on May 17th, 1947. There was no mention of suicide, no despair, no goodbye. The final page was blank except for a single sentence written in the center. The door must stay closed so that I can stay open. I read that sentence a dozen times, trying to understand it. I thought about Cora's body, swinging from the light fixture. I thought about the piano playing itself when the janitor opened the door. And I understood, with a certainty that made my stomach drop, that Cora hadn't killed herself. Eleanor had taken her body. She had walked out of room 13 in Cora Hendricks' flesh, looked around at the world she had been denied for 22 years, and then... what? What happened next? The police report said Miss Hendricks was found dead in room 13, but the diary says she was going to leave, so who came back? I told Rachel everything that night. I showed her the photocopied diary pages, the newspaper article, the blueprints. I told her we had to move. She looked at me like I had lost my mind, but she also looked at the fear in my eyes, the kind of fear that cannot be faked. And she agreed. We started packing that weekend. But on Saturday night, the music returned. Only this time it was different. It was not the hesitant, melancholy playing of a ghost girl learning Chopin. It was fast, furious, triumphant. Rachmaninoff's Prelude in C-sharp minor, played at a tempo that no human pianist could sustain. The walls vibrated, the floor trembled. Lily sat up in bed and said, "Daddy, someone's happy." I ran to the alcove. The door to room 13 was no longer sealed. It stood open, just an inch, just enough for a sliver of darkness to bleed into the hallway. And from that darkness I heard a voice, a young girl's voice, clear and bright. "Thank you for telling my story. I didn't think anyone would ever know. Tell them I played it perfectly. Tell them I finally played it perfectly." I closed the door and I locked it with a padlock from my toolbox. The music didn't stop. It followed us to the new apartment. And last night I heard it coming from Lily's room. She was asleep, but her fingers were moving, like she was playing an invisible piano, and she was smiling. I have read the diary 100 times since we moved. I have highlighted passages, cross-referenced dates, searched online forums for anyone else who has encountered Eleanor. No one has. But I found something else, a real estate listing for a property in upstate New York. A converted one-room schoolhouse built in 1894, recently renovated into a single-family home. The listing photos showed the main room with vaulted ceilings and exposed beams. And in the corner of one photo, barely visible, was a door. A door that had been painted over so many times the grain was buried under layers of white paint. But I could see it. A brass plate, polished clean. Number 13, Eleanor is looking for a new teacher, and I think she has found one in my daughter. Lily has started taking piano lessons. She asked for them herself. She told me she hears music in her head, music she has never heard before, complicated pieces that she hums perfectly. Her teacher says she is a prodigy. I know what she is. But what do I do? The door was sealed for 70 years. It is open now, and it will not close again.